Hello everybody, today on the channel a little bit of motor car philosophy, starring this, the Ferrari 360 Spider, a car which I have experienced before but have never featured on the channel. And this is exactly the sort of car that if you and a friend were walking through town one evening and you spotted, you'd stop, you'd stare at it and you'd say, "Cool, I always fancied one of them." And your mate would turn to you and say, "But Brian, your Boxster costs the same as one of those. Why don't you get one?" And you'd say, "Yeah, well, I thought about it, but thing is, the Boxster's faster and it's cheaper to run, so it's better really. There's no point." Well, today I'm saying, sorry Brian, you are wrong. You see, there is this school of thought that I often encounter in the comment section, which says that everything must be measured, and it must be measured because that is how you work out if something is better. And it is a horrible thing to do to something as passionate as a sports car, and it is a fatal thing to do to a supercar. And so in today's video, I'm going to be telling you not only why I think you can never compare a Boxster with a Ferrari, but why the 360 Spider, even 25 years later, is still a damn good car. Then, first up, a few community notices. This is not actually a comparison video between this and a Boxster of just about any flavour. I suppose if you wanted the fairest and most direct comparison, it would be with something like a 981 Spider, vaguely similar in terms of power, weight, performance, and even price. But the fact is, these are cars separated in the showrooms by more than a decade. They are really very different things, and they are both excellent cars. But before you think that me saying this is not a direct comparison is just a way to sort of weasel out of admitting just how outdated the Ferrari now is, let me tell you, this car has not come to a gunfight with a pointy stick. You see, 25 years old though it may be, when it was launched, this car was something of a technological tour de force, and though sure, its impact has diminished in that time, there's still a lot about it that's really rather remarkable. The 360 Modena, the coupe, landed in 1999, the successor to the much-loved Ferrari F355. And it really had a devilish job, the 360, because not only was it replacing one of Maranello's most loved models, it was also introducing a heap of new technology and a whole new styling language. And I gotta say, I feel a little bit bad because I gave the 360 a very hard time when it came out. I just didn't like the way that it looked. And I continued to give it a hard time for the next sort of near 20 years, really. And then one day, I was stood in front of one and I looked at it and I thought, you know what? That is actually gorgeous. And it does really help to be stood in front of one because in pictures they do appear just a little too soft, but in person not only do they have those proper supercar proportions and styling cues that I think make this a much prettier car than its successor, the F430, it's also a lot sharper than you might first realise, particularly around those front intakes. It has an edge to it, it's not just all rounded off and soft. This is a gorgeous piece of design, and when it comes to the convertible, I think the 360 might actually be the better looking car than the 355. Because if we're talking about spiders here, remember the 360 had no GTS equivalent, the Targa, unless you count the phenomenally rare sunroof option that only about a dozen owners ever spec'd. With the 355, that top at the back sort of folded down and just, well, it just sort of hung around, not doing anything. And I know there are lots of people that really love the 355 Spider, but I'm not one of them. This though, put the roof down and you are left with a profile that still today, 24 years after it was introduced at the turn of the millennium, looks fantastic. Even the roof mechanism itself is still fairly elegant, although not particularly swift, and the car does have to be stationary for it to work. Inside, it's also classic 1990s Ferrari, which is to say a feast of leather, analog dials, and of course, in this example, the classic gated Ferrari shifter. And yes, I will admit that there are elements of it which are slightly rubbish, including the little clock up here, the vents which do look a bit cheap and nasty, and the fact that, like all Ferraris of the period, some of the switches and buttons and things have started to go a bit sticky. But I do think this is a car that has now firmly punched through that phase of simply being a bit old and naff, and now is more of a classic. I'm even beginning to like the aluminium that you have on the dash here and in the doors. I think it really is a nod to both the construction of this car. It was Ferrari's first all aluminium chassis with an aluminium body on top, but also to their cars of the past, because in the likes of the 308 and the Dino badged cars, you also had a similar look for the dash. Naturally, this car followed the time-honoured format for a mid-engine Ferrari in that it had 8 cylinders, natural aspiration, and drove just the rear wheels. Perhaps most significantly, this car was also the final outing for the venerable Ferrari V8, which could trace its roots all the way back to the 308 of the 1970s. Of course, it had grown and changed quite a bit in that time, but it is fundamentally an evolution of the same design. Here, it displaces 3.6 litres, giving the car its name, and it makes 400 horsepower. Torque is not quite so impressive at 275 pounds-feet, but all is generally forgiven when you see that the red line is sat nicely between 8 and 9,000 RPM. The speedo here goes all the way to a somewhat optimistic 220. The actual top speed of this car being in the region of around 180 mile an hour. 0 to 60, that'll be dealt with in 4 and something seconds. But, you sly old dogs, you've got me monologuing and talking numbers, haven't you? And I said at the very beginning that that is the antithesis of a supercar. And I promise I'll stop talking numbers in just a moment. But there is one that I'd like to share with you. 1,500. That is the actual real-world curb weight of a 360 Spider with a manual gearbox. And the reason that is impressive is because it makes this car 100 kilos lighter than an F430 Spider with the F1 box. And that might be why, when a few years ago, off camera, I went looking at a car with a friend, and he was thinking of an F430, and I said, maybe try a 360 Spider, because for the same money you can get a manual. We both came out of the experience saying, you know what, actually, the 360 is the one we'd have. But that was a while ago now, and not on my favourite roads, and I owe it to you and to science to confirm that theory. Need I say more? Well, as it's my job, I suppose I really should. That engine. I know the numbers today are not that impressive, but the thing about it, it feels like it's got just no inertia whatsoever. I mean, look, a Boxster's Flat 6 is one of the all-time greats. It's really, really very good. But this is the Citizen Kane of engines. Actually, no, never mind that. Citizen Kane is a bit weird and overrated and a bit slow and too long, and it's all about a sledge, I think. This is the Terminator 2 of engines. And for the Boxster, today is Judgment Day. And you know what I find fascinating? People put aftermarket exhausts on these. I don't really know why. The valve is a slightly tricky so-and-so, but you know what? You can get a valve controller, hold it open, and I like the fact that when you don't want to wake the dead, you can just poodle along, have a good time, and really enjoy the car. Now, sure, there is a bit of scuttle shake in this. I notice it more now that I've got a camera in here, but I've also got the suspension in its sport mode. Yes, adaptive dampers in 1999, and I know Mitsubishi had them in 1992, but still, it was impressive for the day. And actually, with sport mode off, the whole thing does feel a lot more comfortable. And in reality, if I hadn't got that camera in here, would I actually call it any really worse than a Boxster of the day? Nah, not really. And let's not forget that a Boxster of the day, which would have been a 986, would have made some 140 horsepower less than this. That's one reason it's called a supercar. It was powerful in its day. And something people often talk to me about is, well, is it still a supercar because nowadays you can get a hot hatch that's as quick as this? Well, yes, it is. To me, being a supercar, it's like being the president. Once you were, you always are. It was in its day also fairly expensive. They cost over £100,000. And today, doesn't that sound like such a quaint price? But when this was new, I think I was living in a house that cost £100,000. And you know what, you can do that, you can have a bit of fun, but there is so much else to enjoy about this car, like the amazing view out, both front and rear. You've got those beautiful haunches allowing you to place the car perfectly. It's not actually that wide by modern standards either. Behind you, you can then see the top of that engine bay. This was the first convertible ever where you could see the engine. In the wing mirrors, you can then see those gorgeous air intakes. Every single moment in this car, it is reminding you just how special it is. The steering also, though again not perfect, it is definitely a lot better than that in the F355. That just, well, it just wasn't great, to be honest with you. This is also not brilliant, but certainly an improvement. Unlike modern Ferraris, it's not hypersensitive, it's not ultra darty. It just works, it feels very, very natural. An F430 is definitely a big step on in terms of outright speed, but if you want to simply go out and enjoy a car, this has more than enough. And this is where I think the Spider in particular is a very interesting proposition. Because if you wanted a coupe, I'd be more likely to recommend you an F430. But when you get a Spider, it becomes about a whole different thing. Then it becomes almost exclusively about the theatre. And this, I think, is the better looking car. It is the better sounding car. I am having an absolute blast right now. The other thing I absolutely love about Ferraris, and it's something where people often get them wrong because they haven't experienced them, it's just how comfortable they are. It's true in many ways of the modern ones too, but of this era, they were very nice, usable cars. A bit like sports bikes of the 1990s. Today you'd nearly consider them tourers because of the way they're set up. And this, yeah, sure, it sacrifices a little bit of ultimate composure in the corners, but the result is that the majority of the time, you go along a road that maybe is a little rutted and imperfect, like nearly all good roads are, and you're not being shaken to pieces. This also comes from that era where, yes, though it does have traction control, much of the rest of the car, it's not that electronic, it's still fairly mechanical. And Ferrari always wanted to make sure that those controls were perfect, they were interactive. So yeah, the steering we've already talked about, but the throttle, it's beautiful, not too heavy. The brakes, they're decent, though ultimately they're probably a weak link of the car. The clutch, nice and easy. You can heel and toe fairly well. The pedal boxes on the tight side. This gear lever, nice, light, beautiful. And incidentally, it's the only thing where Josiah has had any issues because when he got the car, it wasn't quite right. The rest of it, though, thus far, has been good. And a well-sorted 360, will be good. If today's video gets you headed towards the classifieds, don't forget to use CarVertical, the super-powered super search that cross-references a number of databases from around the world to give you all the information you want to know on any potential used car purchase. So whether you're looking for a Focus or a Ferrari, make sure to use their service. Even better, with my discount code JAYEMM, you'll get 20% off. But I need to be fair and balanced. There's a few things about this car that aren't so great. We've mentioned already the sticky switches and the like. 360s have a few other well-known issues. They can suffer corrosion on some of the body panels. With them being aluminium, that can be somewhat expensive to repair. Because they were very cheap for a very long time, there are all sorts of issues that they can face that sometimes owners kind of skip over. Meaning that if you do buy one today, I would say in the first year, expect to have to spend a fair bit. I generally advise people either buy one from a very reputable seller, or if you're buying private and the like, budget between £5,000 and £10,000 the first year. And there shouldn't be any big, huge, scary item, but it may just be a series of many smaller ones. They have a well-known and documented appetite for ball joints and the like. And though yes, servicing is generally a little cheaper than an F355, the biggest selling point for me with these is the parts are generally a little more available. Those now are becoming quite tricky to get things that shouldn't be tricky to get. You may also one day go to get in the car and find that you cannot because the door cable has snapped. When you have got in it and run it for a little bit, you'll also discover these are ludicrously thirsty, and that may be one reason why Ferrari fitted them with a 95-litre fuel tank. Yeah, real world MPG? Oh, I don't know. But if you're hypermiling, you probably get maybe about 20 or so. But then it's a Ferrari. Do you care? If you do, don't buy a Ferrari. This one also has a bit of an issue with grip. It is lighting up the traction control light in places and at speeds I've never ever seen before and just shouldn't be happening. I know these cars reasonably well, and today, though it doesn't look particularly bright and sunny, it's dry and it's warm. Grip should not be a concern, but still, it's giving me grief. And I think that might be down to the fact that Josiah has fitted this car with Michelin Pilot Sport 5s. Not S5s, not 4Ss, just 5s. In more good news though, quite a many of the regular ordinary service parts for these cars are both readily available and actually fairly inexpensive. Complete set of discs and pads on this, about 1,500 quid. The springs, I think, are something like £50, and those ball joints, yeah, they're annoying, but you can get them, and you can get the uprated Hill Performance ones, and when you fit those, it should be a bit better behaved. Josiah bought this car at just around the 40,000 mile mark. It is now 2.5 months later on just over 42,000 miles, and he has been very much enjoying his first Ferrari. It is in fact only his second car. He's a young lad that works in the city, he's in his mid-20s, his first was a Boxster, he only drives a car for fun, and so he buys cars that are fun. And I think he's got excellent taste. He is still getting into grip with the dimensions of this. It's quite a bit broader in the shoulders than a 987 Boxster, but that's one of the reasons that it looks better. It is also, perhaps surprisingly, nearly as practical as a Boxster. The overhang on these is nowhere near as dramatic as in a 355, although they don't have the option of suspension lift, so if you are going near a multi-storey car park, exercise caution. The boot, though, is a very good size and still has the proper old-school toolkit and tyre inflation kit in it. This car also has the bucket seats, and they, to me, are an essential option. If I was going to have a 360, I'd have to get these. The normal ones are okay, but I really don't love them. They're a little narrow, they're a little odd, they're not quite as nice as those in a 550, and they look nearly the same, but honestly, they are not at all. These, though, they're magic. They're comfortable, but they're also supportive, and you actually have quite a bit of room behind them too. That I did not expect. If you're on a longer journey, you could easily get a couple of soft bags behind the seat, and that means this, for a cross-continental journey, will be very well suited. The only things against it would be the fact that I think it isn't Euro 4 compliant, though it is ULEZ compliant, at least the later models. And the general advice with 360 seems to be that the later ones are a little better, but honestly today it's much of a muchness. I would consider each car on its own individual merit. I'd personally also prioritise a good service history and evidence of consistent use over a car with low mileage, because if it's genuine, well, there's a good chance it's just sat around for ages, and there's also a chance that it's not. But I would say one maybe good thing about these cars, they do not suffer abuse all that well. So if you do see a 360 that looks a little bit tired and haggard and maybe half of the chassis is in a skip outside somebody's house, probably don't buy it. You'll also have a few odd Ferrari quirks and features to deal with, like the fact that if you do want to get access to that nice big practical boot, you have to do so by flipping a toggle switch down here in the middle of the seats, which then only works with the ignition on. And look, I know there would be plenty of people out there who would look at something like this and go, blimey, 60 grand for one of those, what an absolute con. I'd rather have a GTR for the money, much better, much quicker. And yeah, it would be. But allow me to let you into a little secret. I actually gave you the answer to today's question at the very beginning of this video, when I told you if you were walking through town and you saw a 360, you would stop and you would look at it. You would, wouldn't you? But if it was a Boxster, even a nice Boxster, you probably wouldn't. And that is why the Boxster will never ever be a supercar, and the 360 always will be. A supercar also does not need to be good to drive, but it just so happens that this one is. So if you don't mind, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I want to say a huge thank you to Josiah for bringing his car out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.